Welcome to another episode of VNture podcast, your weekly source of visual novel goodness. I am Amar, and together with Taurus, we shall venture into another discussion about VNs. It's time again. Another month passes, and so another Readport we shall deliver. So Taurus, what title you have read that will surprise us?
Hello everyone, and it's good to see you again another week. This is a title that may come as a shock to some people. I've held off from ever mentioning it in the past because its inclusion as a visual novel is likely going to be a little controversial, and I respect that, so that's why I've been refraining from it. But there has been some material that I must talk about here, and I'm willing to brave the masses who may disagree with me, but so be it. Because this week I want to talk about a VN, or at least VN adjacent, that I've been reading called Fate Grand Order. Yes, it is the mobile gacha game in the Fate universe. And to be fair, I understand that it leans a lot on the gameplay side of things, so I really wouldn't classify it as a VN either. But I want to talk about one of the latest story chapters called Avalon. A quick refresher to anyone who's not familiar, Fate Grand Order is a mobile game, of course. The main character is a master who controls servants summoned famous figures of history. He is wound up becoming part of humanity's defense force organization called Chaldea. And unlike typical Fate stories, he can summon hundreds of servants, thanks to Chaldea's help. He goes around with the organization, saving humanity. Part 1 was its own huge arc that involved singularities in humanity's past, moments throughout history where things were going violently off course, so he needed to travel back in time and set things right. Then there was Part 1.5, which was its own kind of arc. And currently, North America servers are in Part 2 with the Lost Belts. In these are more serious versions of the singularities where Earth's history was knocked violently off course, and it has been living that way for thousands of years and whatnot. So now, that version of Earth has basically transformed into an entirely new history and world. And unfortunately, it's incompatible with current history, so the main character and Chaldea needs to go into these lost belts, investigate all the core causes and whatnot, and resolve the differences so that proper human history can survive.
Okay, there's so much to digest. Especially, funnily enough, I don't think it's that hard to digest for newcomers. It's way more confusing for people with established idea of what a fate is, like me. Because now the fundamental question is, since you said the protagonist is part of a defense squadron and can summon as many as possible, and the entire setup stops being about a fancy ritual or death game, pretty much.
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to unpack all of those changes, but the fundamental structure of servants stays the same as historical figures. But now that you tamper with time-space continuum, where's the history, is it? Because now the history itself is malleable. So I presume for now that heroes of the past that go to the pantheon from which you can summon servants are still from the original history, but that might not be true.
Yes, that's a good point. In fact, servants from these Lost Belt versions can join the Throne of Heroes as well.
Okay.
But I don't want to get too far off into the weeds. I know Fate lore discussions can always go off track real quick. But yes, the Fate series, it has the main Fate Stay Night and whatnot of being battle royales for the Holy Grail. But the spin-offs have gone in all sorts of different directions. There's the whole cyberspace aspect of like the Extra series. There's the Prisma Ilia with magical girls. The whole Fate series is very funny. And so Fate Grand Order is one that goes in a totally different direction. In this one, specifically Lost Belt Chapter 6, it takes place in Avalon Le Fay, a Lost Belt of mythical Britain, chock full of fairies, magecraft, and curses. It's a very magical setting in a different way that we're typically used to in Fate, like especially, the Age of Gods and the whole legends of myth and whatnot. This one is much more of fairies and curses and all sorts of dangers those brings in a very unique sense.
I mean, the name, obviously, you can't avoid comparison to Arthurian legends if you name your land Avalon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned spin-offs. I always liked how Fate spin-offs always take some core aspect and modulate other foundations. Like I really have to respect Prisma Ilia from changing what was the servant and what the role was to suit their storytelling. I kind of like that.
Ooh,
whereas the concept of Holy Grails was to some degree kept as is. Whereas in this case that you're trying to present that was the one that was abolished and changed, whereas the servant and that system has been kept.
Mm-hmm. And there are other differences too, but
yeah,
don't want to get into spoilers and whatnot. Because in this Lost Belt, the ruler of the land is Morgan Le Fay, the frequent antagonist in Arthurian legends of the Knights of the Round Table. And so she is ruling the land, and it is up to a young prophesized Arturia Castor to eventually rise up and overthrow her to save Britain. What I really like about this chapter is, several things, honestly. One of which is the cast of characters, and of course, at the forefront is Arturia Castor, who from now on I'm just going to call Castoria. That's,
Oh my, okay.
That's usually how things go in the naming conventions here.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm. She is not quite the same, Saber from Fate's Day Night and whatnot. This is her in a different setting. It is also her in a different upbringing in this fairy land of mythical Britain. But she still has some of the same personality traits, but, not the same, but different.
Yeah. She's
very unsure of herself. She's not very good at combat or magecraft yet, and yet she's the prophesized one to overthrow this whole monarchy and one of the strongest individuals in the entire realm. She's, headstrong, and she's super competitive, and she puts on a brave face even in the darkest of days. And so a lot of the joy in this is seeing this long, epic, sprawling journey throughout the realm as she slowly builds more accomplishments to her name, as there are setbacks, and as she grows as a person.
This is something that I always admired when it came to Fate, to jump on your point. When you have a hero of legend, if you think about it, by having such a system in which you can summon a servant that is the incarnation of that hero, depending of what stage or journey you summon that hero from, to which class you summon it from, and in the case that you're proposing, from which alternative version of environment they grew up in, they can exhibit different behaviors and essentially become different people. It's like, that's kind of nice system. It acknowledges how heroes grow differently. I mean, heroes, people in general end up differently depending on the environment and the stage of life they are in.
You even get to see a few, I guess, normal individuals from proper human history interact in this new land, and how there's really the whole jarring change in between what people expect and how the land actually is, and its history, and all the other factors that tie into it. So I mean, the character interactions, that's always one thing I love in visual novels, is seeing how characters bounce off each other, how their actions affect other people, and their relationships they have. I always felt like that's a great way to get people invested into a story and its characters, is to show how things affect people themselves.
I mean, the worst VNs and probably have the same qualities as the worst anime, in which you have way too many characters that you give way too little time to. So you basically turn those into Pokemon. You catch them all and you go to the next, right? If you don't develop any kind of relationship between those characters, regardless of their status of being side or main or protagonist, whatever, then it's like, yeah, I'm growing my collection, here's my binder. Like, that's kind of empty. And the best VNs are those that really, really take care to incorporate those people and to showcase how they interact with each other. One of which would be exactly like you say, clashes. So in this case, because you have multiple realities, alternative timelines, so what if you put those clashing versions together? How would they react?
Like you said, otherwise it feels empty.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, another major reason I like this story chapter so much is that it has so much content. There is so much of people doing things instead of in previous Lost Belt chapters, or plenty of other VNs I've read, where there's so much talking. There's a lot of talking and very little doing from the characters, and a lot of backstories just get info dumped to you. I always hate that, It's like I want to see how people express their personalities and their behaviors toward life. And I'm very happy with this Lost Belt Avalon chapter because characters do. You get to see how there's various, important political figures, how much they pledge loyalty to, Castoria and you, the main character, how much of them are, on the fence and they only help you as much as convenient. You get to see some people who are just outright antagonistic and they do things to make your life harder for yourself. You see all sorts of allies who demonstrate their loyalty in various ways. Mash is basically the main heroine of the whole overarching story. So it's you, the main character, and Mash, and various other core cast members. Mash gets separated very early on, and she has her own sprawling story where she's exploring the realm and getting into some hijinks herself that's totally separate from you, the main character, what you're getting up to. And it's like, several other chapters wish they had that much content where they could even have an entire side story running parallel, just as good. It's stuff like that where it's so much more exciting to read because there's something to grip you in the here and now, I
mean, every time the end does multiple perspectives well, it is such a better experience that because it exemplifies the point of those relationships and people doing things instead of being collected. Because in a way, a lot of those VNs tends to end up like that, especially the adventurous type when you're gathering party. You get your scouting member, hop on in and see you at the important bit. See ya. Then you get your engineer. I collected that person. It creates some things. See ya. Like, multiple perspectives is a good predictor of having deeper interaction. I would agree with you. On that note, because you proposed a very interesting metric previously, how is the ratio of female to male characters?
Oh my goodness, you remember that.
Yes, I do.
Yes, basically, it's been a hard and fast rule for me where the more male characters there are in a plot-focused work, the better
Uh-huh.
the VN is. In this
Yes.
case, it's actually very surprising because I'm pretty sure the ratio is way higher on the female side in this
Uh-huh.
chapter. There's a lot more female characters, and yet, they're all written very well. You've got the Queen Morgan, who honestly doesn't make much of an appearance because she's off being the queen and they hardly see her. But the time she does make an appearance, she has a very commanding presence in her actions and how she handles this her kingdom and its threats. You've got the various Tomlin knights, and all of them stand out in their own ways and how they fight against you and others, and how much they stick to their own beliefs and how that unfolds. And then you have all of the characters helping you out along this journey, and some of them, like Oberon, being a little suspicious, and you're like, that just gives extra layers to how they're all interacting and whatnot. So it's very much, I really appreciate all the characters and the interactions and the content they're able to work with. And speaking of content, there's also, I do want to note there's one pretty funny thing they did on the gameplay side of things. So it's possible to raise up servants' levels to level 100. And for the longest time, that was the maximum. But during this story chapter, eventually, Castoria can break through and go to like level 105 when you have her as a guest on your party for the gameplay fight sections. And then she can go even higher up to like 110, 115, 120.
Okay.
And it wasn't until later that the developers revealed the new gameplay mechanics where you could break through this level cap of 100 to raise up your servants to like up to a maximum of like 120 or something. But again, at the time they didn't say that. People just got to experience that in the story gameplay integration side of things as they see Castoria just growing stronger and then breaking through the limits.
Okay, that's actually... Okay. For all those people who demand that gameplay can take away from VNture experience, right? It's all about the feedback, in my opinion. How the feedback loop and how the gameplay supports the narrative. And if you say to me that this setup of this story is a character that is inexperienced and has to prove herself to be the worthy, prophesized ruler, one of the ways in which you can sell it is breaking through the limits. Like, that's a very cool concept to sell that story.
It is. It was a very nice touch. And it's just another one of those things where the production values on this chapter is just miles better than previous chapters, and just this entire game as a whole. Especially the music. There's all sorts of callbacks in the music, to previous chapters in Fate Grand Order. And especially there's some references back to, Fate's Day Night. Especially because, you have this main character of Artoria Castor, who is a very different character, and yet there's still occasional glimpses or comparisons of, the original Artoria Pendragon in Fate's Day Night. Again, there's that comparison and just them being foils of each other that adds so much to the story.
Huh. And in a way, since she's the maturing stage, so she's not yet there in confidence levels, would it be fair to say that the Saber we know is her ideal that she aims for?
Yes, that's played with a little. And yes, that's to a certain degree for as much as it covered. Yes, although it's not always the sort of ideal we're aspiring to be. It's also the more where she's putting pressure on herself. And it's how could I ever reach those heights? How can I measure up? Again, there's so much to it. And honestly, it's a level of character depth that previous chapters in Fate Grand Order haven't ever really approached. So between going from those to where honestly the chapter qualities were kind of all right, to going from this where I'm just blasting through each of the moments, getting to read more. It's been a wild change of pace, and I'm very glad. I very much enjoy it so far. And in fact, this Lost Belt section is so huge, and because of the state of world affairs going on at the time when this was released back in 2020 originally, it had to get split up into 3 parts. Over on the North American servers, we've got parts 1 and 2, and a little backstage peek to how MR and I record these. Part 3 is going to be dropping tomorrow. So I am very much anticipating that, and we'll get to see the ending to this as everything gets wrapped up. Technically, I don't know how it ends. I've managed to avoid spoilers, thank goodness, for all this time. But there's a lot of hanging plot threads, and I think there's going to be a lot of huge surprises left in store. As it is now, I very much, enjoyed this story chapter, even as its own visual novel. I thought it was fantastic.
Just clue me in on one thing, because you talk about gacha that has a VN aspect, right? Now, whether or not we can treat this entire gacha as VN is a separate matter, but at the very least, it is a gacha game that has a VN aspect to it. But is it fair to say that this VN aspect is episodic?
It is episodic because it's a live service game, as pretty much all gacha games are. So that means content gets drip fed out over the course of weeks and months and years and whatnot. This one is especially being episodic because it's getting split up into 3 different parts. So you get like the first third of the story, then the middle third, and then the last third. That's not usually how the devs handle it. This was just special circumstances. Usually they will drop the entire chapter at once. So you get the entire self-contained Lost Belt story.
Okay, I see. Does it fill you with hope, the quality of this one for the future of Failgo?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if I've said that. Actually, I don't think I have. The North American server, which I play on, is 2 years behind the Japanese server. And so we basically know the roadmap for how this game and story and mechanics are all going to play out for the next 2 years. So this has been a very hyped chapter for the entire 2 years, and so I'm very glad to finally get to read it myself. And so, without going into much spoilers, we know of what's coming up in the next 2 years, and things look bright for that as well. Not entirely, there's a few individual events and parts and stuff that are kind of bad. But apparently, it has a bright future ahead.
Nice.
But yes, I mean, that's the whole Lost Belt stuff. There's a lot more I wish I could say, but then that I want to say about specific moments and the characters and my thoughts leading up to things, but obviously this isn't the time to be going into that. Right now, I just want to give a general overview as to why I am loving this chapter so much, even though it's a mobile gacha game.
Even though. Oh.
But with that said, that is plenty out of me. Is there anything you want to talk about, MR?
I mean, it's very hard to. This is why I asked the episodic question, because this is something that is incompatible with me. I really struggle with episodic VNs. I like there to be definite start and definite end. When the stories, such as it is portrayed here, is indefinite, undeterministic. I don't know, is it finished, is it not? Will it be? I just don't like it. Now, that does not take away from the quality of such story. It can be amazing. I like my peace and quiet when I complete a title and I can reminisce on it and what it did good, what it did bad. In a way, probably I could approach that title thinking, defining for myself what's start, what's end. But yeah, at that point, I am not treating that as VN.
No, I agree about the whole episodic stuff. I mentioned part 1 was about singularities of going out and stamping out individual problems in human history. That one concluded, and it was a fantastic ending. And I mean, now that you can, if someone could experience it all in one go, that's great. But because of the episodic nature, and because this was basically a over 2 year long story, I think it hit harder in certain areas, and it had way more emotional impact to it. So on the one hand, it's like, yeah, I do want to finish a story at my own pace, and I want to remember things that happened in between chapters instead of month-long delays between reading. But on the other hand, I do think being episodic and being exposed to the story slowly over the point of years made some stuff hit harder.
Oh,
so
definitely.
It had pros and cons.
Being on top of things right now and playing as it gets released has some unique benefits. Like you mentioned, the new mechanic that lets you break the limit, right?
Yep.
If it gets popular enough that is in common consensus that it's just a thing that happens, then that aspect of a story might not hit as much or hit as hard as you experienced it that moment. And it's probably similar to the fact how in the past such twists as Madoka Magica or Muv-Luv hit differently for those who did not get spoiled, right?
Absolutely. But on the other hand, there are many people who read those works because of the twist, and it's become common knowledge, and that's what they're greatest at.
True. So yeah, it can work both ways.
Yeah.
Oh, it wouldn't be a VNture episode without Fate, right?
Of course not. But now we have to move on from Fate.
Yeah. It's to the title I've read. I've been intrigued for some time by reading the synopsis of it, but finally I've decided to read it, and I read Cabaret. Oh boy, what a title it is. Okay. To start off things, it's a journey, kind of spiritual one, although, not to spoil too much, it could be reduced to more anime-friendly concept. You get isekai, in a way. So you read the story through the perspective of protagonist who had that one bad day in which he died and got reborn, but less so in a fantasy setting and more so in a spiritual world as a monster. And I just feel like I need to get this out of the way because the aesthetic they pull off in this VN just it oozes uniqueness. They put a lot of effort to make that VN very atmospheric, very striking in both graphics, animation, transitions, even the mere fact that they experiment. You know how transition between events and scenes in VN is oftentimes fade to black and then black back to what's happening, or just some sort of transition of that nature. On more dynamic transitions, what they elected to do is play some tarot adjacent cards as if you were trying to see the future or tell a prophecy, in which the details like, so for example, there's a crash, and one card says you were riding on a bike, and then you crashed, and then you stumbled onto the ground. Like, that's a very cool twist of a formula to show some dynamic transition of intense moments. And it kind of looks and remind me of tarot cards how you could have predicted someone's future by pulling, I don't know, the Tower, Death, and Fool, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Super unique.
Mm-hmm. And so it uses these as little in-between side moments, because obviously you don't mean to say these are happening in the main story. These are just quick cutaways, right?
Those are meta aesthetic elements of how they showcase the story. So, for example, if there are two characters talking, so you have on normal VN aesthetic, you have one sprite, a second sprite, etc. But if you decide right now to just quickly punch them, so it opens 3 tarot cards, and what happens in that quick succession? One hit, second hit, and knocked out, for example. Very unique. I like that.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it's... Okay, but I'm veering off topic because I really had to say about what they do and go to such lengths to build atmosphere, sometimes at the cost of functionality, and this is what I struggle with. Because as much as I liked how all of that is presented, as much as I like how all that feels, and in a way, this game feels more like an experience rather than a typical VN, which can be a good or negative depending on how you look at it. But it has also no save slots. Where's my save slots?
What do you mean save? It just auto saves at specific parts and that's it?
There's no saving in this game.
Is it hopefully... I'm assuming it's not the sort of story where it takes like 5 hours to finish and you just have to start at the beginning, right? No.
They go by a singular save state that is continuously overridden in the background, so you have no control over it.
Okay.
There is no save slots for you to manually save.
Okay, so like if you quit the game and then you reload it, you'll be at where you left off, right?
In the nearest save slot that was available, which is sometimes very arbitrary. So sometimes I lost progress, sometimes I did not. So it's like...
Oh no, okay.
You see my point, right?
Yes, exactly.
I want a clearly defined exit points, so I could quit for now or just for a moment or for the day, and I didn't got those. And the clearest exit points are when you have control over save spots, right? If you can save anytime, then you can stop reading at any time. Easy. Since there was no saving at all, I didn't know where the autosave is going to kick in. After some trial and error, I understood, okay, those kind of events trigger the saving process, okay, fine. But that I really... At some point, when you reach so much care to atmosphere, to story, to immersion, I feel like you lose some sight of what's important from the functional standpoint. I'll give you another example, and now jumping off to story, because you get reincarnated as a monster, and you join the titular cabaret. It's a place, a safe haven for monsters of different folklores and different backgrounds to hang out. Spiritual afterlife of sorts. It's very weird to define, but very intriguing nonetheless. And you get a second chance. The guy who found you in the swamps, reincarnated, called Caretaker, takes care of you and gives you a role. You to be the tea master, to lead the tea ceremony, which is in that culture of cabaret a way for those monsters to have a moment to converse. And that's the main gameplay loop. Those monsters approach you, you ask them what would you like to have, they gave you more or less vague or not a feeling of what they would want to get out of that city ceremony. For example, Taurus, just give me something to forget and make it strong. And that's your clue.
All right.
Okay. And that's I just can't stress out how cool and atmospheric it is. But then you open your recipe book, manually flip pages back and forth, and like, okay, this is why I have 2 monitors. Let's print screen all of those recipes. I don't want to flip 40 times.
Goodness gracious.
You see my point? Atmospheric,
Yeah.
100%. It's super immersive. Annoying? Yeah, it is. There's so many bookmarks, manual flipping of the pages. Glossary is very expansive. I really love the glossary, how they explain all the intricate words. For example, in the story, sometimes people reference healers, but they don't use the word healer, but rather, oh my god, I had it in my notes, but it escaped me. They have some weird name for healer. And in a standard and typical VN fashion, it is a word that is highlighted. You can hover over it. It gives you an explanation. This is a type of healer that specializes not only in healing physical injuries, but also is a spiritual guide of sorts. Okay, fine, cool. But again, going over that, so it's not, again, you open the book, flip the pages, look through the bookmarks.
I see. Because the good part of being immersive is that, you get to enjoy the atmosphere and whatnot.
Yes,
but
exactly.
it has to extend to you physically playing the game too.
This is why I try as much as possible to avoid any and all mention of a story, because the story is so good. It's so intriguing, so unique. This is not a VN that you approach thinking, oh, it's another XYZ genre. Oh, high school, I don't know, fine romance thing. No, this is so weird and so unlike other VNs. But it's, in a way, it explores a monster. Okay, in anime, it's very popular to have the monster girls trope, right? But this one explores the monster part from different folklores and doesn't focus on the monster girl aesthetic as much. But it carries over some of those very cool questions, like humans are food to monsters. That's it. How do you approach that dilemma? How do you feel about eating babies? How do you approach eating? Because there was a nice quote I found from one of the characters that said about the morality, I don't live to eat. I eat to live. So the moment any constraints on the morality of food is placed upon that person, it's like it's limiting for him to live. He doesn't treat them any worse, humans. He just sees them as food and a necessity to continue on living. He doesn't bear ill will to those people or anything like that. And it's just so intriguing morality. Like, damn it.
And you mentioned the whole story is like that too, seeing all sorts of different characters and the way they interact.
Yes.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah, and I listened to you talk about Fate Go, right? And it's funny that this title has a, how can I say it the best? At some point, you realize what is going on with the tea ceremonies. Because it is a way for you to bond and make friends with characters and know them better, right? But you often gain points. There are like shown on the screen. They drip 3D points, but you start to wonder what are those points for, and then they unveil that there will be some elections coming on, because politics and factions is a big thing in this VN, and who you like and who you brew correct tea is who you agree with on political front.
Oh, so it's a clever way to have affection points, like in most VNs,
yes,
right? Okay.
Exactly.
Who you like, who you want to support.
Exactly, and there are like very interesting agendas, because one says,
well, no spoilers though.
Okay, the mentality is, should you let nature run its course or abolish that approach? Should you be receiving easy handouts or should you hunt for food? Like, those are hard concepts. And they play on in the politics of those candidates, and different monsters have different approaches. Some sad monsters say, okay, I live a horrible life, I get reincarnated, just give me free food. And the others say, no, I don't want to decay like that. I want to be the best monster I ever was. Let me... Yeah, right? What the hell? It's so cool.
All right, that is interesting. The different ways you can make bonds and who you support.
Yeah, and I feel like always in a VN, there's that pull if you find that one character that is super intriguing, right? And you like seeing that. And I specifically chose the most screenshot with it because I feel the idea of a gene is underrepresented. And I don't mean genie as a spirit or a creature that grants wishes, but rather a gene that is a malevolent spirit that owns or possesses someone. And in this VN, it was my favorite character to listen to.
Ooh, I might have to check this out then.
Yeah.
Another one on the backlog.
Oh, God. Yeah, true. And maybe there's something in that kind of spiritual, how can I say, second or split personality that works so... It's not that different from Tsundere that has two personalities. When you have a person who's very prim and proper, stoic and businesslike, elegant, and then the genie is like, kill them all. Like, there's some twist to... Oh my God, I love that character. It's so whack. I love it. My favorite.
Oh man, okay. Very cool.
Oh yeah, and one thing I saved for the last, because I definitely didn't want to forget that. In this game, you have many mini-games, one of which is the tea ceremony, but that's not the only one. And there's another one about counting grains, and you put some points, but the one that spoke to me the most was marbles. Because I look at those marbles, okay, wait a moment. Those. In my childhood, I played with exactly the same marbles as are in this minigame. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's the genesis. I went out to my grandparents. I scoured their place. I found those marbles. I made screenshots that run in the background of those marbles that I found. And I even asked them where they are from. They got it from the flea market in Lithuania that got imported to, oh my God, I don't remember the English name for the city, but it's Lvov in Poland. It's Lviv, I think, in English. It's the Ukrainian city now, but previously it was a part of Poland. And then they migrated to Poland. And that's how I got those marbles that I played in my childhood. That is showcased in this game. I don't know if it's coincidence, but it was super cool.
Very spooky.
Very spooky.
Are you sure they're not cursed? You want to get those checked out more.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I need to look around because if I get hit by a truck, I'll become a monster myself.
Oh, no. Wishing you the best of luck, MR.
Oh, thank you.
There's danger in your future.
Oh, yeah. True.
But yeah, that is really sweet that, that sort of mini game could connect to you in your past. That's sweet.
Yeah. Damn. I was like, whoa, this is the first time I stopped VN not to Google article or know some concept or maybe reference, but rather to phone my grandparents. Hey, do you know those marbles? Like, what? That was a unique experience for me. Holy hell. But bottom line, I really love this game. It's a shame that it has so many inconveniences when it comes to user interface. Because, first playthrough. Amazing. This is like everything's new, everything's atmospheric, everything's fun. And if there are issues I had with the game, obviously I use my second monitor to solve a lot of that. but there is no skipping either.
That's a shame.
There's no save slot, no skipping. I'm like, I want a second route, a second playthrough. It just, god damn it.
I feel you. That always sucks.
Right?
But still, it sounds good. At the very least, you've enjoyed it, so that no one can take that part of it away.
Exactly. It's a very, very healthy recommendation for me for one playthrough. It's just great experience. Very unique, very atypical for VN, but still very cool.
Well, on that note, I think we'll have to wrap things up for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And yes, we talked a lot. There was these two titles we had a lot to say about, huh?
Yeah.
Very much. And I hope all of that was conveyed over to you listeners. So thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, and see you next week.